Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of Everything is Political, hosted here on the Lost in Law channel. My name is Tim. Joining me today, a frequent guest. Oh,
Yes.
everything. Joining me today is a special guest I've had. I always get freaked out when I hear my own voice in my headphones, and I always forget to pause my own stream. But hey, it's like this is the first time I've been doing this or whatever. Anyways. Returning yet again, a frequent guest on this show, Tracy, calming the chaos. Say hello.
Hello, I'm Tracy at Calming the Chaos. Good to be here again, Tim. I know I do the same thing. I get freaked out because I forget to mute YouTube, which is what I was just doing while you were talking. But when you're the host, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yes, some people, I think, many streamers do actually record while hearing their own voice and feedback. I don't know how they can do that. It's look, I don't need more voices in my head, if that means anything.
Yeah, we may want to get you diagnosed. Of course, you
Oh
like
boy.
doing self-diagnosis, so
Oh yeah,
let's just
I'm
put you on TikTok.
self-diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder.
Or
I
is
have
that what
over
it is?
3 million alters.
3 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
Each
So
one is actually a symbol of the Greek alphabet in different combinations.
yeah, that's wild. I wonder what we're gonna get during the stream. It's gonna be awfully interesting to see if we could just stick to one or we're gonna go to like several hundred or 1,000 or
Yeah,
what.
I don't know. Every time I have homework to do in law school, I split another alter because of the trauma.
Oh gosh. Well, hopefully you've got another year left to go. Hopefully you
Yeah,
catch another million altars there somewhere. This is
I
just a
gotta.
little mental health humor for people who don't know what altars are. We're
Yeah.
not talking about the
Oh,
kind that you kneel at in church. We're talking about the other personalities that Tim has in his head.
yes. There's a fun look. If you ever want some entertainment, go to Reddit and hit up the subreddit "fake disorder cringe" and watch these young attention seekers faking all sorts of mental illnesses. Tourette's is probably my favorite one that they fake. Um, and some of these people do get busted on it too. Not all of them, I guess, are verified fakers, but there's certainly some circumstantial evidence that most of them are. And then
Right.
there's also people who frequent that subreddit who are former fakers
Oh,
who
what?
have yeah, they they admitted that they faked DID in the past and that it was. And that's the thing too. Like the brain is weird like that, Tracy. Because if you fake DID long enough, how long before you start actually believing you have DID to the point where it becomes DID?
It's the same thing with any beliefs, and you can actually change your brain's neural pathways by believing things or telling yourself these stories. That's the same thing that we do in our normal lives. We tell these ourselves stories, and then our brain learns to think in certain ways. So I absolutely believe that could be true, that it could make it true just by you believing that it's true.
Well, speaking of believing things that are true, awesome segue.
Good, good job.
No, the reason I brought you here today, not to talk about faking mental illnesses and DID, although I guess not so much faking mental illness, but in a world where we deal with some of our most traumatic and our most uncomfortable subjects with a glib and dark humor. A lot of things. I think that's very common across society and across people, and especially in a world where when you turn on the news every night, it's always bad news. How long has World War III been a day away from happening?
Yeah, people do to tend to doom and gloom, but then that's the way the human mind works, is to be able to find what's wrong so we can fix the problem. That's the way the brain is programmed to work. The practice, though, is to understand that that's what your brain naturally goes to, but then to also understand that there are things that are stable, like the leaves fall from the trees in the autumn time, and some birds
Mhm.
fly south for the winter, and other birds come back for the summer, and days get shorter and lighter. All that stuff. All the stuff that's stable, people tend to forget about. Their minds are trained to pick up problems.
I think we're just wired to, that little exercise you did as a kid in like the the restaurant coloring book that said like spot the difference between these two pictures. I think we have a unique human trait that is very good at spotting that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard people say like the shape of a human face, a person can see it in a bush really far away, and that's why we have to use camouflage on a battlefield, because you can spot a face in the middle of nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah, the human brain is amazing, and we don't even use all of it to its full potential. And look how smart you and I are. Between the two of us, we may have one brain, right? Actually, probably one and a half since you're going through law school. I'll give you
Mm,
credit for one, and I'll
mm.
I'll take the half. But yeah, it's so true that and then our conscious mind, and then like 97% we don't use. It's our subconscious mind, and it's really rich. If you can access it, that's one of the reasons why I became a hypnotherapist, is so I could use more of my brain. I needed some help using my brain. So,
There's a little bit of a little bit of observational truth behind that. I know, especially when back in the days when I was fixing, every computer tech starts out fixing desktops at a small shop somewhere at like Best Buy or whatever. That's how we usually start out in this field. You just someone drops it off, says it's broken, they don't know what to do, and so you rip it apart and start fixing it. And there are many times where I've had the computer overnight. I can't figure out what's wrong with it, so I just go to sleep. And I wake up in the morning and I know what's wrong with it.
I've done that too. When something has happened to I don't know, I can't get online or something, and I'm like, how come I was able to do that before? My camera's not working now. And I'll remember, or something will occur to me after my brain has had a rest.
So,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
I've discovered I can induce lucid dreaming by shotgunning a Coca-Cola before bed.
That is not true. You can't do that.
uh,
That is
caffeine has
impossible.
caffeine has a very weird effect on people's brains.
Well, that's true if you have the right kind of brain, or the wrong kind of brain, or a different kind of brain. There's no wrong brains, except for the one that's abnormal.
I would hardly call it experimental evidence, because the only time you're lucid dreaming is when you're lucid dreaming, and so it's the maximum amount of selection bias there.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I love lucid dreaming for sure. I didn't know you did that. That is super cool. We'll have to talk about that. I was gonna do
Or maybe
a,
it's the sugar. It might be the sugar and not the caffeine.
it could be, but it's me if I wake up at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. and then I wake up for a little bit and then I go right back to sleep with the intention of lucid dreaming. I can have the wildest time flying around and having sex and doing all kinds of cool things. And yeah, it's really super neat.
Well, if you want an insight into my mind, when I discover I can control the environment of my dream, I usually end up in a Call of Duty match.
You can do that too, and guess what? Nobody actually really dies, right? I mean, we were talking backstage
Although,
about the mind of a 15-year-old, right? Maybe you go back there.
yeah, although I have discovered I can feel pain in my lucid dreams.
Oh, you
Yes,
do?
yes, I can. I
Wow.
in oh god, which Call of Duty was it? There was a weapon, a melee weapon, which was a spring-loaded knife that you could shoot at people. And in my dream, I got shot with one in the arm, and I woke up with a fiery, burning pain in my forearm, which then immediately went away as soon as I was awake.
Interesting. Well, you must have felt, because I believe the brain can't actually experience what it hasn't experienced. So I wonder if in your real life you've actually felt a pain like that. Have you
Yes,
gotten shot?
I have been stabbed before.
Okay, so that's probably why. Yeah, because I was thinking, gosh, I've never felt pain. I've definitely felt like pleasure, of course,
Yeah.
what I've mentioned before. Yeah, and those are the things that the body can access, like the feel of a cat. Like I want my cat, and my cat feels like my cat, right? And yeah, so but wow, that's probably why.
There's
That's
some
super
insight.
cool.
There's some insight into the complex web that is my head.
That is amazing. Yeah, but you could
But
have just gone on to TikTok and figured that out, right? I
yeah,
mean,
of course.
just
I saw we dropped from 4 viewers to one, so
well, I'm one, so we'll get them back maybe. I mean,
oh yeah.
we'll talk about the Crumbleys here eventually, but,
Yeah,
it's
because
kinda nice to do a little intro, a little tete-a-tete or whatever they call it.
yeah, a little
If
back and
that
forth. But
exactly.
let's get on to why we're here today,
Why are we
because
here?
you mentioned the mind of a 15-year-old boy, and of course that's a reference to Ethan Crumbley, the Michigan school shooter out of Oxford. A unique prosecution in the U.S., as far as I can tell, in that the parents were attempted to be held responsible for the actions of the shooter through a gross negligence standard. And so we have witnessed the trial of Jennifer Crumbley, the mother, and James Crumbley's trial is to begin in a couple of weeks. She was found guilty of it was involuntary manslaughter is the charge.
Yep, 4
And
counts.
yeah, 4 counts for the 4 deaths. There were people who were shot and survived, correct? Yeah, the
Yes.
2 witnesses that they're excluding. So, she was not charged with what would be it'd be like
Yeah,
hmm,
what would be a like,
bodily
just
harm. It'd be like negligent aggravated assault, whatever the Michigan equivalent of that would be.
or it could be even child neglect. They didn't go for child neglect. They went for involuntary manslaughter, which was pretty brave, and it was a landmark case because of that. Child neglect could have been something that they pursued and possibly could have gotten us maybe a better and less confusing case out of, but
Well,
the prosecutor chose this route.
yeah, and that always is the discretion of the prosecutor, and it's very hard to challenge that in court. The prosecutor charges what they believe they can convict on, which
Mhm.
is telling because if they didn't charge child neglect, how are you supposed to convict involuntary manslaughter with the gross negligence applying to child neglect?
I don't
That was one of
understand
the
why they
elements.
didn't.
That was one of the elements they had to prove to get to gross negligence. Because, and we will get into a little bit of a legal breakdown, not too much. Obviously, as a Canadian law student, I don't know a whole lot about Michigan statutes. But as an aspiring criminal defense lawyer, these are the things. These are the arguments I expect to make many times in my career.
Mhm.
Is what was criminal negligence?
Well, what's the definition? Didn't you have the definition under Michigan statute of what negligence is or,
Yeah, I have
something like
the
that?
jury instructions that the judge gave, which are like the layperson's understanding of what those legal terms mean, and I think that's a good place to start. But
Mhm.
was there anything from the facts of the case that really stuck out to you that you wanted to? I know this article is pretty. This is a pretty long article. We're not going to read the whole thing, but
It says,
um,
is this one that, talks about the possible repercussions of the decision of guilt, Mrs. Crumbley's guilt, or is this just kind of a background of the case?
sort of. It has some background, but it's about James Crumbley, the father,
Oh, okay, so it's
and
pretty
the
new.
evidence that the defense was trying to exclude. Right. So this article was published only 2 days ago.
Mhm. So
So
they're trying to
yeah.
exclude his journal. They're trying to eliminate 2 witnesses who were the closest people in that hallway to the shooter, or to Ethan when he, and they were both injured and survived. Instead, they're still allowing the testimony of the one, I believe she's an assistant principal or a teacher that was barricaded in her room and he shot through the door and injured her on her shoulder. And then there's the other one who was trying to help Tate, and Tate actually was killed in it, and he bypassed her, but she saw what was going on. So they were 2 really good, credible witnesses that they used in Jennifer's trial. So in addition, they want to do the. I think they kind of want to pile on a little bit onto
Yeah.
James' trial to add these other 2 witnesses who have just come of age, and they weren't able to testify in Jennifer's trial, but they are old enough. They're both 18 now and they're willing to testify. So the judge has to make that call whether or not to allow those 2 students to testify.
Now, the legal argument from the defense side is what do they offer that is not already accepted as facts by the defense? We know that Ethan was the shooter. We know that we know where the gun came from. There's no doubt as to those chain of events.
Mhm.
So what testimony can they offer? They cannot give their opinion as to someone's state of mind. That's inadmissible. So they can only speak to what they have personally heard and seen. And so they may be asked, okay, well, have you ever talked to Ethan? What was he like? And, what was he like in your class? I'm going to guess that the best answer they're going to give is, well, yeah, I mean, I know we were in his class, but I never talked with him and didn't really interact with him. And so, like,
Yeah.
what value does that give the jury? The jury is here to determine if what the facts are. If there's a fact in dispute, it is up to the jury to determine what evidence leads you to which fact.
Mhm.
And what does that testimony assist in any of the fact finding? I
Right. I
struggle to
mean,
find something.
I guess it could go in more into, because I know one of the victims was extensively damaged and her life is pretty much changed. The teacher, the one that got the injury to her shoulder, it's not like she's fine emotionally, and neither is I believe it's the school principal or
Yeah.
whoever. But still, I think they probably want to show that the extensive damage, but I think you're right. You make a great point. We already know what the extensive damage is. They're going to show a video. They've already agreed to silence the video just because it's just so horrifying to watch it. Apparently, they don't even show it on they don't show it on the YouTube at all. They show it in the jury room, or
Well, and I was,
the courtroom.
yeah, I was surprised to see that the judge allowed pictures of the dead bodies to be shown to the jury.
Yeah, well, they had everything. I mean, they had access to the film, they had
Yep.
access to everything.
Which
Exactly.
again, um, for what purpose? What fact is in dispute that showing the dead body will that Ethan killed them? It's not in
No, I
dispute.
think it's just to show the damage, the extent
Yeah.
of the damage that a weapon like that could do. And now Jennifer was not actually with him when the weapon was purchased, but she was apparently the last person to have the gun in her possession, last adult to have the gun in her possession,
Yep.
supposedly. We don't know yet. We don't know
Now,
if James is going to testify that, oh yeah, well, after they came back from the range the day after, well, they bought the gun the day after Thanksgiving, but the next day was a Saturday. And they went to the range together, Jennifer and Ethan did. And what Jennifer had testified to is, we put the gun in the back of the car, of the SUV, in where the wheel well is, and James was supposed to move it. So
right.
she doesn't know
And
what
we'll see
happened
what
to it after that.
yeah, we'll see what his version of the story is after that.
Yeah.
Now, in Canadian criminal law, there's a very specific caution in the rules of evidence. I've got that textbook here behind me about judges allowing graphic crime scene photos in when they're not adding anything to the case. It's the idea that the photos are prejudicial to the accused, and that their probative value or their relevance to any of the facts in dispute is minimal. And so when evidence is overly prejudicial and is not helpful to the fact finder, either the judge or the jury, then it should be excluded. That's the guidance we get here, and I'm aware that there is a similar standard in the U.S. too, where evidence's prejudicial value exceeds its probative value.
Mhm. Well, I think especially because this case has gotten so much attention and they're not going to change the venue. And so most people have already heard about it, especially people who are in the county that Oxford is in. And to go ahead and pile on, that's the word I want to use right now.
Yeah,
Plus, I mean, from an emotional point of view, I wouldn't want to put the students through. They've already done their victim impact statements at Ethan's sentencing.
hmm
So why put them through testifying again, or being up in front of a crowd and telling their story again? I just don't know how it's helpful. I remember looking at not the lady that got shot, but the one who Tate Muir died in her arms. And I could tell she was being re-traumatized on that stand. You can just tell that
hmm
she was re-experiencing it. And I felt awful for her.
Did
And
you
those
see?
ones, oh, go ahead.
Did you see Kyle Rittenhouse's mental breakdown when he was testifying?
Yeah, I did.
And he got to the exact moment where the first guy, the little short pedophile guy, um I forget his name. The first guy he shot came up behind him and was like advancing and charging him, and you can see he froze up at that exact memory where he's cornered. Was it the Zeminski? Zeminski fires the gun, and he's cornered up against the truck, and he sees the short guy come up trying to, box him in. And you can see that was the exact moment that his mind started reliving the entire sequence of events.
Hmm.
I don't remember where I heard this, but PTSD is like a movie that you never saw the ending to.
Hmm. That's an
And
interesting way of describing it.
it always replays in your mind, and you want to know how that movie ended. And so it
Right.
becomes an obsession, something that cannot be removed from your mind until you get the closure of that ending. It,
Wow. That's an interesting way to say it. I mean, PTSD has a lot of different factors, not just the flashbacks sort of thing. But yeah, he was definitely looked like he was going into a state of shock. So that's either fight, flight, or freeze, or fawning. So he was in a shock state. I could tell that just from looking at
yeah.
him. What that was from, whether it was a PTSD, like it was a flashback he was having, I'm not sure. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely can tell when people are being re-traumatized on the stand. So I wouldn't want to put those two students through that. And then plus, I think it's kind of piling on. We'll see what the judge has to say. She's already denied a change of venue, and then apparently, did you say? Wait, she approved one witness, an additional witness who is the guy who is the original owner of the gun
Mhm.
and had bought the gun back in May of 21, fired it a couple, three times, never used the cable lock, put it back in its case, and sold it to the gun store. So when Ethan and his dad bought that gun, when his dad bought the gun, when James Crumbley bought that gun, it had been used. It was a used gun, and there was an unused cable lock in it. And they're going to have this guy apparently testify, the first owner of the gun testify, in order to establish that the cable lock was never used by him. So
Mm.
that and the judge allowed that one. So I don't know what she's going to do with the two witnesses. That's really the only thing she has left to decide. And I haven't. She may have decided, and I just haven't heard about it. But yeah, the two students she still has to, I think, decide about.
There's also the medical records that got excluded. In Canada, we have a doctrine
Mm.
that allows you to violate confidentiality when innocence is at stake.
Hmm.
That applies to the solicitor client privilege, though. I
What
don't know
medical
if it
record?
applies to the medical context.
Oh.
I would have to double check the case law on that one. Um, it is a very obscure part, but you can actually make an application to a judge to pierce that privilege. We've been talking a lot about solicitor client privilege in the Fannie Willis context. If you're aware of that going on,
I am aware it's going on. I have not been following it though. There's too much to follow. I was following
I
Adam
know.
Montgomery and all of the shenanigans that were going on with the Adam Montgomery trial, and kind of thinking about the Jennifer Crumbley trial as it relates to the child neglect. Now, of course, Adam's being accused of killing the kid and abuse, right?
Hmm.
But still, what would happen to Kayla? Kayla was the stepmom who was actually there and complicit in not calling the police or not calling CPS on her own husband. If this was happening, Kayla's actually locked up for perjury right now. And so I was thinking, gosh, Jennifer Crumbley's guilty verdict is going to set some precedents, but I don't know where it's going to lead as far as like how you parent your child, right?
Yeah, this I believe that case the legal standard is going to be very different in that one because a failure to act in the face of something you know is wrong. Um, because if there were man not following this case very well, if there were signs that she ignored that he was abusing the child, then that's the reasonable foreseeability of harm. It's at its face obvious that harm will follow through from physical abuse,
Mhm.
even psychological and emotional abuse. It's not hard to foresee harm coming from that, and so therefore that's your breach, that's your foreseeability, there's your negligence. You're yeah, you're
So
there very quickly. You can actually use, I think, the same fact to establish all the elements of negligence.
yeah, exactly. It's a little bit more nuanced though in the case of Jennifer Crumbley. Was
Hmm.
it this intent, Ethan's intent to cause harm to a school, reasonably or objectively, as you say, foreseeable? Did she know? Or did she have some sort of a clue? She
Yeah.
may have known he was disturbed. She may have said, no, I don't. Plenty of kids, parents say, no, you're not going to get counseling. We're not going to get you mental health help. But then again, they don't go shoot up schools afterwards either. So I'm trying to
Yes.
make sense out of this. Hopefully, between our 1.5 brains, we might be able to do that. I'm dependent on your brain there, Tim.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
big ask.
which altar is gonna present today? All right. This was the charge, the actual charge. So this was repeated 4 times. I've got count number 4. Um, this is Justin Schilling's death. So, first that the defendant caused the death of the victim and died as a result of storing a firearm and its ammunition so as to allow access to the firearm and ammunition by her minor child. Second, in doing the act caused the victim's death, the defendant acted in a grossly negligent manner. So there's a lot of legalese there. So let's break down some of the legalese, which thankfully the judge did, because jury instructions are written in the layest possible terms, in the layman's terms. So here's where the prosecutor's theory comes in. First, the prosecutor claims the defendant committed involuntary manslaughter because she failed to perform a legal duty. That legal duty was the Michigan statute for the care and control of a minor child.
Hmm.
And I don't have I didn't bring up the Michigan statute for care and control of a minor child because it's short and does not really offer you anything that we can use to. It just says, if you don't do this, you are guilty of a crime of failure to control, care and control. In the alternative, the prosecutor claims that the defendant committed involuntary manslaughter because she was grossly negligent. So there's 2 routes to get to this conviction. Either she failed in the legal duty to her child by Michigan statute, or she failed by the common law duty to prevent harm that was reasonably foreseeable. And where do I get that from? Well, I just scroll down. All right, so the first one was to perform a legal duty, and the judge spells it out here by statute. First, that the defendant had a legal duty. Sorry, this is the first victim. The legal duty charged here is one imposed by law. In Michigan, a parent has a legal duty to exercise reasonable care to control their minor child so as to prevent the minor child from intentionally harming others or prevent the minor child from conducting themselves in a way that creates an unreasonable risk of bodily harm to others. This duty arises when both of the following are true. The parent knows or has reason to know that they have the ability to control their minor child, and the parent knows of the necessity and opportunity for exercising such control. And that, Tracy, is where we get into the meat of how they were able to establish the guilt. The jury arrived at the conclusion. Now, again, there was 2 routes. So some jurors may have, the judge says, as long as you all get to the same finish line, the path there doesn't matter. Right? So if one juror says, well, I believe she's guilty of the breach of this legal standard, and the other juror says, well, no, I didn't think she breached the Michigan legal standard, but I also believe she was grossly negligent in that second theory, so I'm also going to convict and vote guilty. That's still valid. It's the end result that matters, that has to be unanimous, not how you got there within your own mind.
And both have to be true. So we're
Yes.
looking at gross negligence is the failure to provide reasonable care, and that is listed there in A and B. Reasonable care. The parent knows.
Yep.
Okay.
That's not the gross negligence one. That is the failure to perform a legal duty.
Oh,
Because
okay.
Michigan statute actually spells out that you have to do these things. You have the actual law is that you have reasonable care to control their minor child, to prevent the minor child from intentionally harming others, or
Okay.
to prevent the minor child from conducting themselves in a way. That one doesn't matter. It's this one, because the
Okay.
intent to harm was there. So we're under this part. I can't highlight on this, but
No, I see it. Okay. So this
yeah,
is the legal duty of
yeah,
care and control
legal
of a
duty.
minor child. Okay.
Okay. Second,
Yeah.
that the that the defense that Jennifer knew of the facts that gave rise to the duty. That's easy. That's an easy one. She is the parent of the child. There are questions sometimes where you have custody or control of a child. Are you responsible for their conduct? That is not such the case here.
Mm-hmm.
Third, the defendant willfully neglected or refused to perform that duty, and her failure to perform it was grossly negligent to human life. There is a clarification on what that means further below. I'll get to that in just a second. Fourth, that the death was directly caused by that failure to perform the duty, meaning that there is no interruption in the chain of events. In order to be directly responsible for something, you need not to be the one who pulled the trigger. But in this case, the prosecution alleged that she gave him the gun. And so that's a very short and easy way to say, yeah, you're responsible for what happened. When you give someone a gun and they shouldn't have that gun, you're responsible for what they do with that gun afterwards.
Right.
That's not a very controversial legal concept. It was the idea that as we get further down, that and a judge clarifies here, that the victim died as a result of the defendant's failure to exercise the reasonable care and control her minor child required, so as to prevent the minor child from intentionally harming others, and that she knew she had the ability to control her minor child and knew of the necessity and opportunity to do so. So to convict on this route, to convict under the legal standard route, they had to be convinced that Jennifer knew or ought to have known that Ethan was having mental issues, and that by not taking steps to remove his access to firearms, they obviously didn't believe her when she tried to pass the blame off to the father. By not removing those risks, she was grossly negligent. Again, to find guilt using this pathway, she had to A, know that he was having mental problems, B, was reasonably sure that he was going to hurt someone, C, knowing that, refused to remove his access to firearms.
Mm-hmm.
All of those have to be true in order to convict on that route. There is the second conviction route. That's just a
I
repeat.
didn't know there were two routes.
Yep. Okay, here's something before I get to what the grossly negligent standard is. This is the reasonable foreseeability. The defendant must be the cause of the death. There may be more than one cause of death. It is not enough that the defendant's act made it possible for the death to occur. In order to find that the death of the 4 victims were caused by the defendant, you must find beyond a reasonable doubt that the deaths were the natural or necessary result of the defendant's act. Again, not a very controversial statement to make. You give a gun to someone who's unstable, you can be reasonably sure they're going to hurt someone with it. Okay? You heard evidence that the defendant's son shot the 4 victims. As previously noted, there may be more than one cause of death, and defendant's acts or inactions need not be the sole cause of harm. In order to find that the death of the 4 victims was caused by the defendant, you must also find beyond a reasonable doubt that her son's act of shooting someone was reasonably foreseeable. And Tracy, this is where I want you to go, just take over the show from here, because
take over the show.
Just take over the show, because I want you to talk about we've talked a lot about the shooter's journal, some of the red flags that were raised. There is reasonable doubt in my mind as to whether Jennifer was aware of these. But let's go under the assumption that she became aware at some point and just simply lied on the stand. Let's operate under that assumption to start with.
Mm-hmm.
Is those warning signs, and we'll go through one at a time and then take them as a whole. Okay. How many of those signs give rise to the reasonable foreseeability that the shooter was going to kill someone? Again, we don't have to, reasonable foreseeability doesn't require that you have to know exactly he was going to bring a gun to the school and shoot someone, only that he had the intent to cause harm.
Right.
Right? that he was
Mhm.
going to hurt someone, and that intent was reasonably foreseeable. So if you can go through some of
Right.
the things that we saw in the trial, some of the evidence that came up.
Well, the first thing that came up for me when you were talking was that I remember during Jennifer Crumbley's testimony, she said that Ethan was outside that night, the night before the shooting. He was outside, and that they had gotten in an argument, and that they had taken his phone. And but then he has this manifesto, this video he took on his phone saying tomorrow is the day. And if you haven't heard this 20-minute video, they didn't show the video portion of it. It's just the audio. He says specifically, tomorrow people are going to die, and this is what I am going to do, and this is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use my gun. She claims that he did not have that phone. If that's so, somebody, if she had the phone, why wasn't she looking through his phone? I mean, I don't know. Either he had the phone or he didn't. That manifesto was on his phone. It was a 20-minute movie
Yeah.
that if she was concerned and she had taken his phone away, then that for me, I'm like, okay, clearly she's telling a lie, because they've already played it in his Miller trial that he had a phone that night. It could have been maybe before he got in trouble. I don't know. But she at any time could have taken his phone away and seen that, for sure. So what you say, the intent to maybe could she have objectively foreseen that he was going to be doing this? Sure. If she had taken his phone away and looked through his phone and looked through his videos, she probably could have known. We don't know if she did that or not. She
Yeah.
said he had his phone,
And
or she had his phone.
And would there be I mean, obviously, look, I don't have a 15-year-old kid. If I did, I would not want to see what's in his phone. It's probably gross and disgusting.
But wouldn't you? Well, I mean, come on now, Tim. I mean,
No, no, you gotta understand that you gotta I how do I don't even know how I came into this knowledge, but the rise
you were
of
a 15-year-old kid one time, a male.
yeah, but this was before anime became very popular. I have
Oh.
come to the realization now that most of these kids have at least one waifu on their phone.
Hmm.
Most have many. And I
Is it?
remember when I was in high school, like, you got to remember, when I was in high school, the internet was a pretty new thing. Like, high speed internet was a new thing. I grew up in the dial up era, and then DSL, when I was in high school, was the new emerging technology. And so that was our kind of first high speed internet, long before everyone had a cell phone. But I distinctly remember someone going into the library, downloading these panty shots of anime girls onto a USB stick, which back then were like 256 megabytes. Oh, those were the days.
Oh yeah, you could build a family on one of those back then.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
build and then go back home and, presumably do whatever to those panty shots. I remember someone doing it. It wasn't me. Before you it wasn't me.
Hey, no judgment here,
But
right?
I absolutely
Remember.
caught someone doing it.
Well,
And
okay. Yeah.
that is look, if I go through my 15-year-old son's phone and I see one of those panty shots, I'm gonna throw the phone at the wall.
Oh, okay. But why do they have such a thing called parental controls though? So if it's not important that you look
It's
through your kid's phone, if you don't have so why do they even make parental controls?
Parental controls was created to make the illusion that you have any control over your child, which is one goes to one of the facts of the case here, is whether she knew she had the ability to control him. How many
Mhm.
parents out there believe they have control over their 15-year-old son?
Well, no, but that's why when they say you said, reasonably, or you said
Yeah.
objectively
So
foreseeable, but then reasonable care and taking reasonable care would have been. I think my son's feeling a little depressed lately, is what she had been telling the mother of Ethan's best friend who had gotten sent away to an institution or something like that.
Yeah.
She knew he was depressed. She had talked about him being a little bit moody, a little bit more quiet. And so I don't know that a look through the phone at that point in time, depending on how he was presenting, would be within a mother's. Like, I would just kind of want to know what's going on with him, who he's texting, what he's saying, what he's looking at, just for his own safety. I'm just saying that as a person who's I'm not a mom, but
Yeah.
if I was, I probably, because I'm a mental health counselor, I probably would notice or want to know. And I would ask him to voluntarily let, like, can I see what's on your phone? Obviously, I'm the one that's paying for his phone because I'm his parent. I have a right to probably see what's on the phone. The phone could be a privileged. That's one of the things that kids hate, is when their parents take away their phones. That's one of the things that we talk about in changing behavior, is that if you don't do this, then we're going to take away your phone. Behavior miraculously improves, right? But
Interesting.
I would.
Interesting you said that. You made a legal point there that I think might actually be in dispute. You have
What's
a
that? What
right
did I do? Oh my God.
you have a right to invade the privacy of your kid, even because you paid for the phone. Now,
Mm,
the court in select circumstances would disagree with you on that one.
really?
You do have a right to privacy, um, within reason, even if someone else provided the item to you.
Well, yeah, well, like, so if I'm a parent though, and this is my child, and my
Yes.
child is doing something with something that I purchased for him, then I don't know if what the legal thing is, but as a parent, I would say that I absolutely have I mean, I would ask for permission first.
Yeah, the context was an employer buying a cell phone for an employee. So obviously not the parent-child relationship,
Yeah.
which has its own very special set of circumstances. In fact, I think that I think the privacy rights are extinguished by the parent-child relationship. But again, it's conflicting legal standards. And so that would have to go to the trier of fact or even a judge
Yeah.
to determine which right overrides the other.
Mm.
On its face, I do believe the parental right is the strongest, but then tell that to the people protesting those SOGI bills going across the country right now.
Don't know about that.
Oh, sexual orientation, gender identity.
Oh, no. Oh no,
Big
you
issue in
talked about that
Canada.
on one of your last streams.
Yes, big issue in Canada right now is teachers teaching kids about gender fluidity and diversity, graphic books depicting non-traditional sexual relationships available to children under the age of 10, which,
Yeah.
again, I believe that's way too young. But regardless, that is a big political issue in Canada right now, and the side that opposes it takes it under the so-called parental rights banner. In fact,
Mhm.
there are statutes being passed in Saskatchewan, Alberta, New Brunswick. Um, yeah, those are the three provinces, and I think Ontario's almost about to introduce their own version of the parental rights legislation, which requires parental consent to change your name and pronouns in school under the age of 16, I think, or 15, 16. No gender affirming surgeries or permanent altering drugs until the age of 18, and the right to be informed of and opt out of sexual education in class. Those are considered the parental rights banner. And so it's a huge political football right now. And I made this observation on one of the shout out to Making Law Simple, MLS,
Mhm.
David. Shout out to his coverage because I made the comment on his stream at the time. It seems like the state has been trying to erode parents' rights for the decades now, and then suddenly, and this will get into the political aspect of this prosecution, but suddenly now parents are like, no, you had full control of your kids, and all you have, the kid has no rights independent of you, because a I see the comment. I'll pull it up in a second. um at the state knows best, and that's always been their attitude, and especially on the Democrat side of the political thought, they certainly think that parents are not deserving of making all of the choices in regards to the care of their children, especially when it comes to learning about things like diversity, inclusivity, gender identity, sexual orientation, things like that. So, I mean, you can't have it both ways. You either make the parent fully responsible for the child, or you make the state fully responsible for the child and make the parent a bystander. Almost
Mhm.
the the state is the parent and the biological parent is the guardian, right?
Yeah, you make a good point comparing the gun, like, well, invasion of privacy and the gun possession sort of thing, versus
So
gender. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
okay. So
Anyways, the finality of that argument was Jennifer's obligation to search his phone reasonable? Or was it discretionary? If it's discretionary, then it's not a duty. If it's something you can choose to do, and if you do it, there's no legal consequences, and if you don't do it, there's no legal consequences, right?
mhm.
That absolutely is your finding of innocence for the negligent standard. You had a duty to do so, you had discretion, not a duty. You had discretion to do something.
Right. I
And
mean,
so did she have discretion to search his phone, or did she have an obligation?
I believe she had the right to do that if she
Yeah,
wanted to.
yeah,
If she saw the signs that he was troubled, and apparently she wasn't really taking a whole lot of the stuff seriously that he said about the ghosts, and maybe that is true. But she did notice that he was depressed, and I just would have wanted to know how he was acting.
that's a yeah. I
Hey,
mean,
that's my mom. That's my mom. Hi, mom.
oh, thanks for joining us. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
and thanks for not looking at my diary, too. I was gonna actually mention that because I had a diary as a kid, and I don't think my mom looked into in it, but I don't know that she saw anything that was, like, going on with me or whatever, like, so but,
Yeah.
yeah, again, it's just being a parent is just such a hard job. That's why I opted out of it.
Well, and you brought up a diary, and of course, the shooter had his
Yep.
journal, and I wanted to talk about just the idea that even if you were aware, again, let's go on the assumption that at some point Jennifer was made aware of at least some of the contents of the shooter's journal. Is the journal a reasonably foreseeable pathway to the intent to harm someone in your mind? And I'm sure you've dealt with people who have created these journals, they've expressed to you in confidence that they've had some of these thoughts. And so, can you talk a little bit about, you know, the dynamic? Okay, how do you go about determining? Because you have a legal obligation. If you think one of your clients is about to act in a way that is imminently harmful to someone else, you have a duty to report that. In fact, you could be considered negligent. You could be charged with involuntary manslaughter if you had this knowledge and refused to act on it.
Yeah, I mean, we're held to a little bit stricter standards because we've been trained and such, but
Yes.
I guess so your question is like, so the contents of the journal we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because from diary to journal. Yeah, so if I saw the contents of that journal, I definitely, as a counselor, I definitely want to talk to him about his intent because thoughts are just thoughts, they're not facts. I think we
Right.
talked about that backstage that 15-year-old kids can often fantasize about a variety of things and write them down and never do them. They're
Mhm.
just getting energy out. So what we want to do is assess in the means to do it. Did he have the means to do it, and did he have the true intention of doing it? And so I don't know that Jennifer even saw that journal. I
No,
think
no
that if
evidence was ever given that she did. Just
yeah,
that
and
one math assignment, right? But we'll go to that. That's a separate
yes.
thing. We'll go to that in a second.
Exactly.
Um,
Like my mom said, I don't think that if I was, if I had a kid who had a backpack, I wouldn't be rummaging through his backpack or her backpack. But if there was some concerning things and there was a phone involved, I think I might ask for permission to go through the phone and see what was going on. But if there was nothing that Jennifer saw that was of concern, she may not have looked in there. But yeah, so anyway, so it has to be so some thoughts can be present. That's not reportable. If there's thoughts and a plan and the intention and the means, like basically in his manifesto he was saying that here's
mhm.
what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it tomorrow. If somebody told me that in a counseling session, I'd have to call the police.
Yeah.
So I don't know
In,
that
in
anybody though. saw that manifesto. He didn't blast it live on Instagram or YouTube. So, there you go. Jennifer
Yeah.
may have been completely ignorant. That's why she's going to appeal. And I don't know.
Now,
You're making some good points
yeah,
about this, and maybe
maybe I'm
changing
starting
their
to change
mind.
your mind a little.
Yeah.
There was no evidence offered that she actually saw the video, and they had, they can tell what time something was accessed on a phone. They have those audit logs, right? You can say, "Oh, you turned the we saw this in the Alec Murdoch trial." They know when you turn your phone sideways. They can actually pull
Good
that from an
point.
audit log.
So then I wonder, yeah, I guess because the prosecution didn't bring that up in court, does that mean that they know that
There was no evidence.
she did not look at it? She
Yeah,
didn't know about it. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise the prosecution would have brought that up in court.
And they would have slam dunked it, or they at least would have put it to the jury and said, "It's possible she looked at the
Yeah.
video. You
Well,
decide if she did or not."
exactly. I don't, even assuming, and I've assumed this all along, she did not look at his phone and she did not look at the journal. And she may have had no clue about any of this stuff. And
Yeah,
she may have thought her child was a little depressed, and she had maybe done a Google search on depression, say. Okay, so then those are the things. But I think that math paper and the search for ammunition. We're going to Monday after Thanksgiving. He searched for ammunition. Tuesday was the math paper day, and that was the day of the shooting.
yeah.
And I don't know. Do you have a picture of the math paper?
I don't want to show it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's your channel, dude.
Yeah, I don't want to show it.
Yeah, and why not? Because okay, so let's go to the math paper. Both of his parents saw the math paper that morning, and you don't even want to show it on your channel.
Only because it hits too close to home.
Okay, yeah, enough said.
Yeah, enough said. We'll just
Okay,
move on from that. But anyways, it was available. It was shown to the public at the trial. If you really want to see what was on it, you can go look for it yourself, do your own
yeah,
research and
okay.
whatever. Um,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, it concerns you. I mean, obviously, it concerns you enough not to want to show it on your channel, but think about if you were a dad and saw that math paper and it was your son, your 15-year-old son, and they let him go back to school,
yeah,
and they knew that he had access to it. Well, he had access to a gun. They thought that they had hidden it, but you know how kids are; they can find a lot of
yeah.
things too.
And I do believe when I said it hits too close to home, I really wanted to join the army when I was a young kid. One of my favorite video game franchises was the Army Men franchise. You know, the little green plastic soldiers.
Yeah, my
They made
brother
some.
used to play with those.
They made some interesting video games back in the day. Um, what studio? I forget what studio it was. Anyways, yeah, Army Men 3D, Sarge's Heroes. God, those are like PlayStation 1 era games. Anyways, and so yeah, I would looking up bullets is seems so innocent to me. Info about bullets and rounds and ammunition, even guns. Man, I used to do that stuff all the time because I was like, I want to know how these things work. They fascinate me. Battleships. Oh God, I used to draw warships on my school papers. Like,
Right, right. Well, that's the thing is, I don't they didn't the school didn't take it very seriously either, him looking up ammunition. Plus, he was looking up ammunition for a 22. He wasn't looking up ammunition for
a 50
his
cal.
cellar. Yeah, yeah, 9 millimeter. So they didn't really take it that seriously. They just did a courtesy call to the house. But that was something that maybe a parent would keep in mind that,
Yeah.
Ethan, what are you doing? And there was some text exchanges about that. Don't get caught. Don't look up ammo at school. What are you thinking, kind of thing.
Yeah, she
But
testified to that, and I totally bought that testimony as credible. There were parts of
yeah.
her testimony I didn't think she was telling the truth. That was the part I thought she was telling the truth. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
she don't get caught, and then she's talking about how when she was a child, she was a troublemaker, and you can see in the eyes, right? You can see it
Hmm.
as her eyes are looking up at the ceiling as she's reminiscing about her own childhood. Oh, I got
Hmm.
caught making trouble, and my mom told me, it's not about getting in trouble, it's about getting caught. And so I said
Hmm.
the same thing to Ethan. And
Yeah.
that was a very mother moment for her. And I just saw that light up in her face, and I'm like, no, that's truthful. That's coming across very genuine.
Right.
So on its face, Googling about ammunition would not give you reasonable foreseeability that he was about to kill someone,
Yeah, he
right?
was looking up a specific caliber, a 22 caliber, because he had found a casing or something like that in his
Yeah.
room, and he was looking it up by a number or something like that. But he was using his own phone, and somebody happened to see him. I guess they had really vigilant teachers there at Oxford, because then the next day with the whole math paper, that came up, and then the parents actually came in.
Yeah. And again, there was no specific threat on the papers, right? He wasn't writing, I'm going to kill someone, I'm going to school and shoot it up. It was just imagery.
It had some words to it. That's why they took it to the school counselor.
It had
Um,
words. Well, I
oh yeah.
forget the words.
Let
Oh,
me,
maybe
I
we do
mean,
need
I
to pull it
won't.
up. Maybe we do need to pull it up. But definitely
Don't taint your channel now, Tim. Let me just go look it up myself, and you go ahead and talk for just a bit. Let me look it up, and I'll tell you the
I'll
words on it.
answer I'll address this question. Whoops. Up where's that? Oh yeah, here we go. Thought experiment. Would the statute would state statute regulating the place in which firearms are kept comport with Bruin's history and tradition test on keeping and bearing firearms? I mean, you're talking to a Canadian law student about some very advanced Second Amendment constitutional issues. On its face, I would say that the idea with the history and tradition test is that um, reasonable actions taken in the early founding of America's history to deprive someone of unfettered access rights and duties with regards to their firearms must be the basis for any infringement of a Second Amendment. Um, that said, the idea of keeping guns out of the hands of criminals and domestic abusers, that has so far held up. If you have an active restraining order, even if you haven't been convicted of a crime, if you have an active restraining order on you, you can forfeit your firearms. I don't think that's very controversial in the U.S. Maybe. I mean, obviously, the issue there is obviously people filing false restraining orders, but that's why you have your day in court, right? The whole due process clause. Due process is again, all rights in the U.S. Constitution are limited by the due process clause. It says so right in the language, right? You have these rights are. I forget the exact. I don't know the exact language of the U.S. Constitution, but yes, the only way to deprive you of your liberty or your life with the death penalty is by due process. The only way to deprive you of your First Amendment rights is due process. The only way to deprive you of your Second Amendment is due process. So, to go back to your question, whether a statute requiring some sort of storage, I don't know if that's a traditional. If that, I guess that's going back to common law too, but I don't think that's a traditional means of restricting people's access to firearms. In Canada, there absolutely is that legal obligation because we don't have a Second Amendment, and our charter has a built-in limiter called the it's section 1 of the charter. It's the um reasonable limits as can be what is it called, as can be justified in a free and democratic society, the reasonable limits clause. So and of course firearms in Canada is a privilege, not a right. And so all of the duties that arise from it regarding storage and transportation are direct results of that being able to keep that privilege. So I don't know. I don't think a statute requiring some sort of safe storage. At the same time, there might be a history and tradition in regards to access to minors. I don't know the history on that one. And so even if the law on its face value is not does not comply with the Bruin ruling, I could absolutely see a style of an interpretation in which it could be. And so maybe the court kicks it back to the legislature and says, "Hey, just clean up the language a little bit. Make it more specific, less general." Okay, so and then you had a follow up there. Not fond of Michigan of all states setting precedent like this. Yeah, we'll get to that political motivation a bit.
Yeah, my mom is actually somebody who worked in the legal profession, so I'm really glad she's here. She's bringing up some pretty good points here. But thanks, Jacob, as well. Okay, so and I know there's a couple more questions in the chat. Do you want me to read what's on the paper first, or
If you want to pull it up, I'll bring it up.
no? It's
I'm just
okay.
being a wimp. I'll bring it up.
Don't be no. Come on now. I'm not going to shame you. But basically, there's a gun pointing downward saying, "The thoughts won't stop, help me." And then there's a man kind of looking like a superhero. And then up there's a bullet and blood everywhere. And then a kind of a laughing, crying face. Over here in this corner says, "My life is useless. The world is dead."
Those just
For
sound like song lyrics. Honestly, they could just be from the average 3 Days Grace song.
That's true. I mean, or,
Now,
Nirvana, right?
the voices won't stop.
Mhm.
What? Because people have an internal monologue. Hearing voices isn't an automatic mental health red
The
flag.
thoughts won't stop. Yeah, the thoughts.
Or
Yeah,
the thoughts. Sorry, the thoughts.
right. Yeah, I mean, in fact, one of my friends texted me yesterday and said, "Do you have a constant screaming thought?" And I was like, Well, no. I mean, if I do, it's a lot quieter these days. But yeah, help me." So there's a cry for help, blood everywhere, a bullet, a gun, and my life is used. It looks like a person who's suicidal. And I
Yeah,
think I agree with the school counselor on this, is that it looked like there was a person who wanted to harm himself. And it doesn't if there was like a group of people and there was somebody pointing a gun at a group of people, I would think maybe more indicative of a school shooting, but we can never tell. We
yeah,
just have to
exactly.
talk to our kids. I
Now,
think that's my bottom line, is like, talk to your kids a little bit more and see what's inside their heads.
I'm glad you brought that up because can you translate? You say that the math paper screams of someone who may possibly have I guess the clinical term would be suicide ideation.
Ideation.
Yeah,
Exactly, because we don't know of a plan or an intent or the means, but the parents knew of the means, the gun, and
yeah,
didn't mention it to the school.
yeah.
And that's
Um,
what got me, I think. One of the main things that got me is that the 2 of them, like, apparently one of them had hidden the gun, the other one the ammo, so neither one of them kinda knew where both of them were, and or if that's a cooked up story or whatever they did with the gun, whatever, they knew there was a gun, they knew that Ethan had access to a gun or could find a gun, or, it was a small house. He could have found
now,
it.
now, if Ethan goes and stabs someone, are we having a different conversation?
Like with a kitchen knife,
Yeah, if
right?
he just grabbed a random knife
Good
off the
point.
kitchen because he couldn't find the gun.
Good point. Absolutely. I mean,
I think
so
it I don't think it changes the conversation one bit because it's all about foreseeability. Foreseeability does not specify the exact means of harming someone. So
mhm.
it's actually independent and neutral of the actual method he used to inflict that harm. The foreseeability simply means that he had some intent of inflicting harm. The weapon doesn't matter, right?
The
If
weapon
someone
kinda
comes in
does
and
matter,
says,
though. I mean, when you're looking at a school shooting, you wanna have a weapon that's not gonna be a knife. I mean, obviously, in school
I
knifing or
mean,
whatever, that don't happen because they usually come in with their, semi-automatic guns, and then that's why they call it a mass shooting, is because these things can kill a lot of people all at one time, and I'm not anti-gun by any means, but that's why the kitchen knife theory, I mean, while it's reasonable, it's like, bring a kitchen knife to work or to school and stab a friend or two. I mean, you're gonna probably get tackled down a little bit more than if when you have a 9 millimeter pistol and you're firing bullets.
yeah.
But
But again, we're conflating the legal standards with the emotional standards
I
here,
know.
right? Those are
Well, that's
those are
why we're
things
here
that go to
together, Tim.
sentencing. Yeah.
That's why we're
That
here together.
and that's those things that come up at sentencing, right? That goes to callousness, right? The things he said while he was killing people, the impact of the injuries, the violence of the wounds, right? Um whether he walked up and executed someone point blank versus he killed them with distance fire, right? Those are the things that matter at sentencing. None of that matters in finding guilt. Because you're not more guilty because you walked up and shot someone in the head as opposed to shooting them at a long distance and they still died. You're not more guilty. Oh, you're muted.
So maybe you're right about with James Crumbley's trial. I think what they're going to try and bring out is that he's the one that actually put the gun in the hands of the shooter or Ethan, and that
Yeah.
he will still be culpable. But you make a good point for the defense is that a weapon is a weapon. And this is something that I guess is commonly done in the state of Michigan as far as buying kids guns,
Yep.
all that other stuff. So
And to talk about the gun culture in the U.S., Democrats talk about the gun culture in the U.S. We have a gun culture in Canada too. We have a very strong tradition of hunting in Canada. Now, because we don't have the Second Amendment, our protections aren't as powerful, but you can still go to court and say if the government's deprived you of your guns for no good reason, there may be some sort of petition or redress that the court can give to you, especially for the indigenous people who have the tradition of hunting. In
yeah.
which and the court has ruled that the fact that we didn't have guns before European contact is irrelevant, right?
Mhm.
When it comes to indigenous people exercising their treaty rights, it's completely irrelevant the means and the technology that we use to exercise our cultural beliefs in the modern times. So the fact that we didn't have guns before European contact does not matter to the argument that depriving indigenous people of guns affects their traditional hunting rights.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is not a gun issue, it's a mental
Yeah.
health issue, and when you put the 2
Anyways,
together
yeah,
and you do if you did a background check on I mean, obviously, I think one of the reasons why people don't go into counseling is because they wanna keep their guns, and they don't wanna be found out that they may have mental health issues or whatever, and then they kinda go unchecked. But, yeah, for me, this was a mental health issue with a boy who was so sweet looking. I don't know if you've seen any of the
oh
he
yeah,
used to have a little YouTube channel. He was such a sweet little kid, and he looked like, just I don't know, he just looked very sweet. Obviously, people grow up and they change and they develop and everything. But, you just gotta wonder what the whole story was as far as his emotional, development
it's
and his being depressed and then really his manifesto. If anybody in your audience has not listened to that 20-minute rant he went on his phone, it was a video, we only heard the audio portion of it, 20 minutes long, saying how he really didn't like the world of work, he really didn't like a bunch of things. I
yep.
remember I was on actually Uncivil
Every
Law. He had a
oh
call-in show, and I called in, and we were talking about, like, when the verdict came out, and I said something about, like, oh, I could something about, well, that manifesto is something I could just psychoanalyze, and he goes he kinda challenged me. He said, "Well, so could you do that in 30 seconds?" And I said, "What, you want me to analyze Ethan Crumbley in, like, 30 seconds?" And I did my best. But basically, I think you were talking about it too. What does the world expect of me? What's my place in it? I wanted to go in the army. I couldn't go into the army, and because, like, what's going to happen? I'm going to come back with PTSD, and my life is going to be ruined. But there's nothing here for me otherwise. And so he was really super hopeless. So he says, my solution is to teach people a lesson, and that's why I'm going to shoot up the school. And so he talked about exactly what he was going to do in that manifesto. uh, if he had been talking to a counselor or somebody had let him talk this out, it may not have gone down this way.
I have to wonder though that once that dark demon gets inside your mind, I don't think you ever truly lose it. Counseling may suppress it, but I don't think you can ever bring someone fully back from uh, to the point where they now again. There's a question to be had: is whether everything in that video was serious, or was it a getting out, bearing the soul, right? Getting that out of your system so that you don't act on it.
Right.
The whole we talked about it backstage, right? The whole idea of writing an angry letter and not sending it to someone.
Yep.
Was it that or was it not? That's not for me to decide. I think only Ethan really knows. It would
Mhm.
be interesting to hook him up to a lie detector test.
Well, he won't say anything, and I think so he's got a public defender, and she's doing an absolutely amazing job with him, and, his so Jennifer and James, they have 2 attorneys from the same law firm, but they're different attorneys, and, I don't know, what
Shannon
you
Smith
think
was
about
not
Shannon.
she did not get a passing grade on my. Did you hear the part where she's like, "Oh my god, I'm going to literally kill myself," while she was having tech issues?
Right? Yeah, well, she apologized about that, and
Of
but
course.
yeah, but
It's
yes,
still bad. The optics are awful.
yeah, when
There's so
I was
much.
listening to the replay, I'm just like, "Oh, did I just hear what I heard?" I was scooping the cat box at the time. I remember exactly when I was listening to that. I'm like, "Did she just say what I thought she said?" It was so totally crazy, what happened that Friday,
So,
before the Monday.
yeah.
Anyway, um,
So anyways,
so
going back to that, math assignment,
mhm.
if anyone turns in a page that looks identical to that, are you now you said themselves, you're concerned about their own safety. Can you
I would be
translate
asking
that?
questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I would
Can
be
you
asking
translate
questions.
that to other people? Because again, there is, if Ethan just steals his dad's gun and offs himself in the shed, no charges, right?
Which
No
is
charges.
interesting, yeah. Then why couldn't
So,
they,
but
charge
then
the parents for the death of their kid?
yeah, all the facts are the same. And again, the
Good
prosecutorial
point.
discretion would probably go along the lines of, yeah, maybe technically they're guilty of a crime, but it is not in the public's interest to pursue charges for the parents whose son just committed suicide. Um,
Yeah,
Again, now if he had turned a gun on himself after the shooting, if he hadn't been tackled, right?
mhm.
Um, Again, very different conversation as to have the parents suffered enough. Do you want them to suffer more? In this case, looking solely at the math paper in isolation, is it reasonably foreseeable in is that to better rephrase the question, if any minor child submits that paper to you, are you immediately concerned for the safety of other people? Not
No.
themselves, other people.
I would say no, based on this whole "my life is useless." If I would see some verbiage of like, uh, "These people at school are all awful and I want them dead," then yeah, I would think more like in terms of, yeah, he's gonna hurt other people, but what he said on the math paper was, "The thoughts won't stop, help me, my life is useless, the world is dead."
Yeah.
I would interpret that as, well, first off, I'd ask him more questions, but yeah, I'd interpret that as somebody that wanted to end their own lives. But he essentially did. He just did it in a different way because he knew he wanted to be a mass shooter that actually lives. He said that was one of his goals. I don't want to die. I want to just go ahead and I'm not going to kill myself like, the people did in Columbine and all that other stuff. So yeah, I would ask a question like, okay, well, so do you have access to a gun? The very first thing I would say, because there's a gun there. Do you have access to a gun? Let's see. Do you have it in your possession? I mean, I don't know.
Well,
I guess
yeah,
maybe I'm a
the answer
little
to the
bit more
second question would be
paranoid.
no.
Well, he did have it in his possession, but he could have lied to me. I mean, I'm talking about the
Yeah.
morning of when we have the school counselor and we've got the resource manager or whatever the heck he was. He was the a dean of students there,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and the 2 parents and Ethan. We if I were that school counselor, I'd be asking the very first question I'd ask, because the gun's the very first thing I see on that piece of paper, because it's just right there in the upper left hand. Do you have access to a gun? And then I would tell the parents, lock up the guns. We do this all the time with people who cut themselves. Obviously, we can't, I mean, kids find all kinds of ways to harm themselves, but when we do the
Yeah.
best that we can, you can probably cut yourself with paper if you want to. But we do have them take precautions, remove sharp objects, store them away. Even pencil sharpeners, we have to have them remove the pencil sharpeners. So so I would ask about that first, and I would ask if there was a plan and if there was the intention and the means is the very first thing that I would ask about though for this. And then I'd ask, what is your intention? And
Yeah.
let's get you some help like right now.
And are you aware of the wait times to access mental health services on a non-emergency basis?
Apparently, they had in Michigan a facility that they work very close with that you can get in there on the same day, and it's completely free. Now, I'm not familiar with the services in that area, but I've been told by more than a few people. I made a couple of videos on my channel about this, and some people have contacted me and talked to me about, like, well, the parents could have taken him to, I forget, it's called like Brighter Day or something like that,
Yeah.
that they could have just taken him in there. It's walk in and you're seeing that same day. But they wanted to go back to work, and they sent him back to school because the counselor said he shouldn't be alone.
Hmm.
So, I
And I
mean,
wonder if they mistook that advice.
the parents could have been just ignorant of that. It's like, well, we got to go back to work. Somebody's gonna have to make money to support this household, and so kid goes
Well,
back to school, and because on the advice of the counselor. I worry about the counselor is probably going to have a civil suit at least. I don't know if the state's going to be pressing charges against the school counselor or the school, but yeah, that's a different argument, I guess, for a different
well, then
day.
that goes to the political nature of the prosecution too, because the school
Right.
is immune from criminal liability in that case. Civil liability, on the other hand, there's definitely a wrongful death suit that can come forward from that. I don't think they get the same immunity, but again, not being a lawyer there, I know more about criminal law than I know civil standards. I know much less about American civil standards. So I did
Yeah.
want to finish off the thread before we change over to the political nature of the prosecution. There was one thing I wanted to bring up, which was the definition of gross negligence. So this was the second route to get to the conviction. So the first route was the breach of the legal duty, which we've covered. We've covered it to death. There are unresolved questions as to whether Jennifer had the opportunity and the understanding that the shooter needed help and neglected to get that help for him. I think that's still an open question. Now, again, to get convicted, you must believe it beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't mean that, okay, on the balance of probability, it's more likely than not that she was aware that he was going to hurt someone and should have got help for him. But that's not good enough. You need the beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that you should be certain, not kind of certain, fairly certain, pretty sure, right?
Mhm.
Every time you start qualifying those words, you're departing from that beyond reasonable standard.
Okay, so gross negligence means more than carelessness.
Yeah.
Willfully disregarding the result. So would that even cover well, we don't know that she wouldn't have gotten Ethan some psychological help within 48 hours, which is what they required. She hadn't been looking up anything, but then again, she had to get back to work, or she wanted to, and it was only a couple hours later that the shooting happened.
Yeah.
So I don't know about willfully, but by concealing the fact that there was a semi-automatic firearm in the house, though, I don't
Okay.
know. I mean,
Did she conceal it, or was she not asked and she didn't think to mention it?
oh, okay, come on now, Tim. There's a gun that looks just like that gun that they have on the paper. Why? I mean, would is okay? That's
I
to
mean,
imply that
she might
she's
have been like,
stupid,
"Oh, that's
and
his
she's
gun."
not. She's actually a pretty smart lady. So I don't know that she didn't put two and two together there.
Okay. That one, okay, so that certainly weighs in favor of prosecution. Now the willful disregarding means it's an active thing, that it was a risk that actively occurred in your mind and that you disregarded that risk. All right. The likelihood of the risk is sort of relevant, but a minor factor. It's the idea that it's something that had to have occurred to you and that you just put it aside and said, "Oh, that's not going to happen." Right? Carelessness is can also include things you should have known, whereas willfulness does not include that category. That's the distinction between those two words. That's why gross negligent. That's why negligence is modified by the word gross. It's in Canada we call it the marked and substantial departure standard. Um, Negligence is any departure from the standard of care expected of any reasonable person. That's pure negligence. Gross negligence is that marked and substantial departure. So it's not enough that you didn't consider a scenario. You had to have considered the scenario and then just disregarded that scenario from occurring to apply into the facts of this case. And the judge basically spells it out here. First, Jennifer had to know of the danger to another, not to himself, the danger to another. That is, she knew there was a situation that required her to take ordinary care to avoid injuring another. Second, that the defendant could have avoided injuring another by using ordinary care. So if she does practice her care, but the thing still happens,
she could go on record as doing the best that she could to have that's what we do in the mental health field too, is we do the best that we can. We do our due diligence. We can't be perfect. We can't watch them around the clock, but at least you can go on record as consulting with other people and doing exercising ordinary care for sure. And I don't know that she did that by not. I mean, you bring up a good point, and so does my mom in the chat. My mom brings up great points, like as far as this was a school counselor, not a licensed mental health counselor. Why he didn't ask about the gun, maybe part of his training, and why Jennifer didn't tell about the gun, could be, I don't know, for any number of reasons. I'm not sure. But
not telling about the gun is minimally careless. Is it willful, though? Is it grossly negligent? Because again, if it just didn't occur to her, she looked at the gun, she's like, oh, it's a gun. If it just didn't occur to her, that's not the guilty mind. The mens rea, you've heard of mens rea, right? The guilty mind. The guilty mind for gross negligence is, oh, that looks a lot like the gun he has. I hope he doesn't use it to kill someone. Nah, he wouldn't do that.
Okay, well,
that's willfully disregarding, right?
That's what I feel like she did, though, Tim.
Okay,
I'm
again,
serious.
yeah,
this is why I would go into a jury room, and I told this to my mom too. I would go in there and I would say, you know what, I think that this was negligence, blah blah blah. I figured that the most of the people that are going to be on a jury are going to say not guilty.
So there is no doubt in your mind that she had the mental capacity, the mental process internally that said, oh man, that really looks like the gun I bought him, or my husband bought him.
But
yeah, he's not the kind. Nah, he wouldn't
do that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly the impression I got.
Okay.
And whether it's true or not, we can disagree and still be friends.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the fact question that goes to the jury.
I know. That's why it would have been hard to be on that jury.
And then the third one is the extension of the second one. Well, the third one is it's funny because it's labeled 4.
I know, but the third one is second.
Okay. Third, that the defendant failed to use ordinary care, right? So could have and failed to do so. You can just kind of combine those two, right? Could she have prevented this, and did she fail to prevent this? I remain unconvinced that no one ever wants to think that and you talked about how sweet he was. That actually weighs against her. In her favor. No one wants to imagine that their sweet little boy can become this killer. This psycho. Look at that. I'm sure you've studied the mothers of serial killers.
Oh yeah, it's the last one was the Columbine lady who did all those the TED Talk and all that other stuff. I forget her name. Yeah, so I get it. You watch Intervention, that thing, that show about addiction. They all start out as sweet children, so don't we all, right? But I guess, getting back to that, did she know? She may not have put 2 and 2 together, and so maybe she didn't.
That sounds like doubt. That sounds like reasonable doubt. Again, well, there can be zero question in your mind. Well,
okay, this is exactly why I would have been probably swayed by a jury to vote not guilty. This is why I was so surprised by the verdict, because I was telling my mom, I would have gone in there with guilty and this and that, but I would expect other people to have made these points that you're making to me. And then, and then I thought it was a hung jury because they were out for over a day.
I thought it was going to be hung.
Yeah. And then when it wasn't hung, when they had a verdict, I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to have to choose one. So I chose not guilty. I was wrong. I really did think it would come back when there was a verdict as not guilty. What was your
And
process when you found out there was a verdict?
I thought there was going to be a guilty verdict. I did not want to be a guilty
Really?
verdict, but I thought there was going to be a guilty verdict, and that's why we're going to this topic now.
Oh, okay. Yes,
This
because
show
this
is
is your
called this show is called Everything is Political. It's a belief of mine that every decision, no matter how trivial or insignificant, is swayed at least in part by the political beliefs that you hold.
but the definition of politics or political is your own like agenda, isn't that right? I mean,
Yeah,
so
so
political has a meaning that's not just like these politicians that are out there doing these things and
yep,
making
yep,
laws.
yep, yep. No,
Okay.
a political belief is the application of your moral values to social issues and dilemmas in regards to the operation of society and policy, right? Policy and politics are like two sides of the same coin. Policy is the implementation of the sales job that politicians do. So the politician is like a salesman. The policy, right? The law that they pass, the pronouncements when they go to these conventions and they're like, this is our stance on this issue. That's a policy statement, right? When Trump says build the wall, that's a policy statement. The politician is responsible for selling that policy to the people. Now,
I'm tracking.
yep. So if you're following that along that line, so again, it's the application of your moral beliefs, right? Your personal values, the things that you hold to be true and are priority in your life. It's the application of those into political issues. So that tends to determine which side you fall on a political issue. When I say that everything is political, every decision, no matter how minute, is based at least in part of the relationship you have with society and how you apply your moral and social beliefs. Now,
Well,
obviously, the most absurd of this is what dress am I going to wear? But then think about it. If you're going to a formal event, why would you dress fancy at all? Why? It's not for yourself.
well, isn't there a dress code?
And who
Sorry, you lost
enforces
me on that.
and who enforces the dress code?
I don't
Not
yeah, I
any
don't
one
know.
person, right?
I guess it's just I guess, yeah, you asked me to
Again,
get a
you're
formal dress, I get a formal dress because 'cause
yeah.
I'm a rule obeyer.
But even then, you go to a job interview, you decrease the likelihood of getting your job if you show up in baggy jeans that are torn to shreds and a ketchup stained T-shirt that says "I love weed" on it, right? But
Uh,
again, but
yeah,
why? Why does that doesn't speak to any of your qualifications whatsoever? But
right,
it
it's
certainly
social
speaks to your
norms.
character.
Yeah. For sure,
And
for
so
sure.
again,
For
it's a gimmick.
optics.
It's the gimmick of this show. The gimmick of everything is political is that no matter how trivial the decision is, I will find a way to bring it back to a political belief.
Okay. Okay, so in
Anyways,
this case, what is political about this case that we're talking about right now then, Tim?
so the precedent setting of this case was it was the first time that the parents of a school shooter was attempted to be held liable for the shooting itself. We've seen some civil cases. Sandy Hook comes to mind where they went after the gun manufacturer. Civil, however, is different from criminal. Criminal liability deprives you of your liberty. It means that, and it is among the harshest penalties that anyone can look. If I can pay you $1,000 to not go to jail, I will do it. Right? Because one is much worse than the other. I can live without the $1,000. I don't know how long I would survive in jail. I'd probably say something wrong to someone and get my ass kicked. I know
You
me.
one of
I
your
know
one of
me
your
very
many
well.
one of your many alters would have said it, right? You can always
Yeah.
blame it on your alternative personalities,
You can't
of
punch me.
course.
I'm not, I'm not the host right now.
Wait, I'm not the host,
That
I'm in the back of the bus, somebody else is driving the bus.
don't think that would work. Don't think that'd go over well.
No,
But
no,
anyways,
prison people don't reason real good. So
yeah, there even is there is a such thing as a prisoner's code though, and when I go into criminal defense, I'm actually going to learn a lot more about this stuff. I plan on taking prisoners' rights next semester in law school.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
but there is a prisoner's code. There
Mhm.
is it's similar to the hockey code. Are you familiar with the code of hockey or even professional sports in general? Right? where
I'm not sure. There's probably more than one.
okay, the the reason Remington settled is because they to them paying the money was more important than going through that process. But anyways, just responding to Jacob's comment.
Okay.
Sandy Hook sued Remington, the gun manufacturer. The reason they settled is because paying the money was worse than going through all of that trial. Calling all of the parents as witnesses. And could you just imagine? Could you just imagine being the executives of the company sitting there and listening to those stories? What it would do to you? They said, "I'd rather just pay the money." Anyways,
Well, yeah.
that was a bit of a sidetrack.
What's political about this case? And then my mom was asking about earlier about can we expect charges filed against Kyle Rittenhouse's parents for his actions when he was a minor? So yeah, what's political about Rittenhouse would be interesting to hear from you as well.
Oh, right. Well, that was obviously so. Of course, the context of Kyle Rittenhouse was the protest for uh, Jacoby Blake, I think was his name, which was an African American man shot by the police in Wisconsin. In that town, why am I forgetting? Why am I flunking Kenosha? In Kenosha, and so there was a Black Lives Matter riot there. And then Kyle, seeing the damage to a community he felt very strongly attached to, traveled there to volunteer to try and assist. That's the context that shooting took place in. He had armed himself well within, and he was found not guilty of the illegal carrying of the firearm by a minor because, actually, that charge was stayed by the judge because he was legally carrying the firearm according to the laws of Wisconsin. He knew, good on him. He knew the law and he exercised it almost perfectly. You could not expect a better self-defense case because everything was documented on video. But the context of that was, so the prosecution, again, one of the clearest cut cases of self-defense in Wisconsin. Self-defense can be an absolute defense, if I recall correctly from Riqueda's coverage, in that if you claim self-defense, the prosecutor can decline to file the charges. There are some states where I believe they still file the charges because self-defense is a question of law, which is put in front of a judge. Or sorry, well, it's a question of fact. It's a mixed fact and law question. And so that requires a trier of fact to determine if self-defense was... That's how it's done in Canada. You can be charged in a case of clear self-defense, but then acquitted because of self-defense. So there's different dynamics with the way the law interacts in that way.
So the political issue in Rittenhouse was
it was the exercise of that Second Amendment, right? The open carry against the BLM protesters that the police had been ordered to stand down from.
Mm-hmm.
So the riots are going on. There's a ton of damage going on in the city. Businesses are getting burned down. And the police were ordered to stand down. And so volunteers started defending properties.
Is that legal?
Yes. Yes, defense of property is absolutely...
Is that just under Wisconsin law? It's legal?
Yep. Wisconsin has very good self-defense and defense of property and defense of third-person laws. They're comprehensive and they're made with the understanding that, look, sometimes help isn't always close by. In this case, the help was unwilling and unable to help.
So are you saying that in the event that law enforcement is ordered to stand down, then we can just do vigilante justice here?
Well, no, what Kyle did was not vigilante justice. So again, that's the media narrative, and that goes to the political nature of the prosecution. This was not a white kid who opposed the killing of Jacob Blake and therefore shot a bunch of protesters. It had nothing to do with the incident that sparked all of the protests. Yes, the context matters, but there was certainly a narrative that this white boy from an upper middle class family, this white boy shot the Black Lives Matter protesters who happened to all be white, but that's just by luck. Because there were certainly many African-American protesters there.
Okay, you can it's kinda like I can make everything a mental health issue, everything, like, relates back to mental health. You can make everything a political issue,
Yep.
apparently.
Hey,
So we've got the gifts in different areas, right? So,
that's the gimmick of
okay.
the show. When
Well,
I
yeah,
say
I
everything is
know.
political,
Yeah,
so
you just
the
started
political,
this series, maybe about a month or so ago you
yeah,
started this
this is
series? Yeah.
the third episode.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
I have
cool.
yet to do a consistent schedule on it. I'm hoping to get Steve. Please listen to that video with Steve Gosney if you haven't yet.
I
You,
think
the
I did.
audience, check out episode 1 with Steve Gosney. We had a very in-depth discussion of how his religious beliefs have influenced his political and legal opinions.
Alright.
Very, very good conversation, very in depth in that one, and we got into a very respectful debate. I have identified myself as an atheist, and of course, Steve identifies himself very strongly as a Catholic. And
Wow.
it was interesting to hear him talk about what his faith means to him, how he obtained his, because he converted to Catholicism. How he obtained his faith, how I lost mine, right? Those are the topics we can get into on this show
Wow.
anytime. But
Wow.
to go back to your original question as to what
Yeah.
makes the Crumley trial political,
Yes, political,
so
yeah.
it was a Democrat in the U.S. It's a lot easier to make this assertion because district attorneys are elected positions and they tend to have a political affiliation, Democrat or Republican. Same with judges, right? They typically have a kind of affiliation, and so that affiliation is often brought up when you're criticizing that person. Fannie Willis, for instance, is a Democrat. Think that's without controversy. The DA in this county is also a Democrat, as I've seen, or at least a rhino. I'm not sure entirely of the politics. I Oxford is like it's not terribly far from Detroit, as I understand it, but it is considered, it's quite the drive. It would be,
It's about an hour and a half, north of Detroit.
yeah. So if you worked in downtown Detroit, that would be one hell of a commute for you.
Mhm.
Not unheard of. I'm sure a couple of people live in Oxford who commute to Detroit, but that would be the exception, not the norm. Calgary has cities like that too that are an hour away, and sometimes, Cochrane's an hour away from Calgary, which
Mhm.
is a beautiful mountain resort town set right inside a valley.
Sounds like
It,
you wanna be there right now.
Cochrane's a very expensive place to live because of the resort nature of the town, and it's also the opening gateway to Banff National Park, which is where like
Oh,
Canada's best natural wonders are, like Lake Louise, the Valley of Ten Peaks, Johnston Canyon,
wow.
the Continental Divide.
I should
Anyways,
go there.
I'm off topic.
Yeah, thanks
Anyways,
for, providing me with a little bit of a tour of Canada. So
yeah,
is the political issue the gun issue? Is that what it
yes,
is? Like, if they
yeah.
are left-leaning, prosecutors, then what they want is stricter gun laws, because that's their political agenda right there. What
Yeah.
about the parental issue?
Yes, and so the erosion of the parental rights is something that the Democrats have wanted for a long time. The SOGI issue is not nearly as prominent in the U.S., but I want to turn your attention to Governor Youngkin down, I believe the state is Virginia. He won an upset. He's a Republican who won an upset victory over the Democrat. I forget if it was an incumbent or challenger. I know Youngkin was not the incumbent, but I forget if the previous governor had termed out. Anyways, he scored the upset victory. Virginia is typically a Democrat governor. But he got the upset victory because of the issue of parents going into school board meetings and reading out of very graphic sexual books, and then and then getting arrested, told they were disturbing the peace. There was also some documents were revealed in a Senate hearing that the FBI keeps active tabs on parents under their domestic terrorism filings on parents who raise this idea of indoctrinating and sexualizing young children in schools. Call it for what it is. So that is the parental rights issue at the forefront. There's also the idea that public versus private schools, and the uh, it's been threatened by some thought provokers. I know Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has talked about this, about the evils of homeschooling. And so, although there's no active movement at the moment to strip away homeschooling from parents, it certainly has been talked about as perhaps the next front in the parental rights issue.
Mm.
And the way you erode that is you start mandating that homeschools have to conform to state rigorous standards, which means that you have to send your kid to a public school for at least one semester so that they can assess whether the homeschooling is effective. Something along those lines. Again, very theoretical at this point because there's no active movement to do so. Okay, that's where the parental rights issue is going. So there was also a lot of the, in general, there seems to be a lot of the state removing the responsibility of parents from children when it comes to especially teenagers wanting to change their gender. And especially with, there's been, of course, if you hang out on the right wing of any any online right-wing source, you'll hear the horror stories coming out of various hospitals where they perform gender-affirming surgeries on minors. Usually it's with the consent of the parent.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it actually is illegal to do it without the consent of the parent. But I know that it's been considered and actively pursued in several states. So the parental rights issue is, as you're starting to see now, it's very wide, encompassing, and expanding. This is just another front on that major issue.
Right. How much should we hold children and how much should we let them be free?
Yeah.
And that's going to be that spectrum that we have to sort of negotiate. I can see where you're going here. You're starting to get my mind to think in different directions.
Now let me take it in two more directions. Should you
Oh
hold
boy.
the mother of any
I've only got half
gangster?
a brain, remember? I've only got
Yeah.
half a brain.
Well, let's go.
Be gentle.
Let's just be bi-directional for now.
All right.
Should the
I'll
parent
agree.
of any gangster who commits a crime be held responsible?
Yeah, that's come up before as well, and I think that people are a little bit going a little bit off the rails about this. The Crumbly might set a precedent for some of that stuff to happen, but
Oh no, it won't happen. Again, that's why it's political. No, there is no way any prosecutor would charge a single black mother with her son being a gangster.
and why not?
That would not serve the public interest. Prosecutorial discretion must serve the
Because
public interest, right?
okay, so what you're saying is all of the cases that go to trial and the people who the prosecutors choose to prosecute, it's all for political reasons.
Yep. That's
Well,
why
I cracked the code.
That's why in Los Angeles, you won't even be charged with a crime if your theft is under a certain dollar value. In New York, you will not be charged with a crime if the theft is under a certain dollar value. Even though it is a crime, you will not be charged. They have made this a they've made this a policy, right? The political DAs have made this a policy. Judges giving people lenient sentences, giving people bail when they really shouldn't be out on bail. Have you heard how many police officers have been killed by someone who was on bail or probation this year alone?
I know. That is something I've noticed. I've never really traced it back to a political thing, but what about drugs? People are getting a lot of time for doing drugs or for with intent to deal or to sell and or having drug related charges. What's the political agenda of that? Is that like the opioid crisis or something like that? You're just like
so Reagan started with the war on drugs. The drugs is a very complex thing because left Democrats were very pro drug in like the 80s and 70s. Remember that whole liberation movement, Woodstock, and all that fun stuff?
Well, that
right?
was in the 60s, wasn't
60s.
it?
Sorry, 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
80s was when they started having kids, which was my generation.
Yeah. Well, that's when they
anyways,
started doing cocaine instead of smoking weed, right? But I digress.
but it was more than weed. It was a lot more than weed. Acid, meth,
Well,
heroin.
I don't
It
know
was
that
a
much
lot
of
more
it.
than just weed.
Yeah.
Anyways, so there's that consideration, right? There's this whole like liberty and counterculture consideration of the illegal drug trade. There was also drugs are often a tool for police investigations. When you know you have dirt on someone and you want them to flip on the Mr. Big, you pick them up and say, "Oh, look at this bag of weed I found in your pocket." Well, someone's going back to jail because it's your third strike, unless you sell out your boss.
Right. Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
tool has been used and abused, especially on African Americans. There's been several examples of where white people caught with drugs have been sentenced to less than black people caught with drugs. Sentencing is always an individual pursuit, and so there's maybe context we didn't know about in each case. Each state is different, and some states have 3 strikes rules where there's the escalating punishment principle, right? Where every subsequent conviction should result in a harsher punishment. All of those are at play, and so I'm stating that as an objective fact. Simply, I have seen instances where it's been applied, and I do know that there are politics at play when it comes to both sentencing and the decision to press charges and prosecute. I know those are both political decisions, and so I can just rationally infer that disproportionate sentences also had political leanings to them.
Yeah, I'm going to have to think about things in more of a political way. I never really thought about, not never, but I just don't frequently think about it from that lens. I typically think about it from a mental health lens. So,
yeah. Now,
so
I
it's kind of
mentioned
cool.
I did mention the bidirectional, so let's go the other direction. So, of course, we took the parental rights issue to its slippery slope conclusion and determined that it would probably not, it would be ridiculous. And so that the hypothesis doesn't hold true that parents can always be held for the violence their teenage sons commit. And let me tell you, if you're a mother and you don't know your son's in a gang, I do think you're being willfully disregarding any signs to the contrary, because gang affiliation is all about membership and publicity, right?
Do you think all mothers know that their kids are part of a gang?
I would say that they suspect. There is evidence that they saw that they could be in a gang, and perhaps they said, "Well, no, that can't be my kid," or they didn't care. There are definitely mothers who just don't care.
That's the thing I saw again in Jennifer Crumbley. It's like, no, I see there's a gun on this paper. No, I see that there's this writing, but that's not that Ethan would never do that. Yeah, exactly.
And so if again, under that same logic, then the parent should be charged, because Jennifer was charged. If you're being consistent, then every single mother in Detroit whose son committed a killing in a gang should be charged if we are being consistent. But no, we are not consistent because everything is political.
It's political.
The second direction I wanted to send you on was considering what this does for gun rights. Because we'd mentioned it before, we didn't get a chance to really expand upon that. Is this paving the way for legislation that controls the access to firearms and also red flag laws?
Well, they are introducing new legislation into Michigan, I think, as we speak,
So
based
the
on
answer
this
is yes.
case. That would be a yes, because I've heard that. I don't know exactly what the legislation is, but maybe to lock up the firearms. I don't know, because you're right. You said that earlier in the show that there's no laws right now governing Michiganians to lock up their firearms. So really, they didn't have that on the Crumbleys, but they're going to be making some laws, or at least presenting those laws to take place. I don't know that they've been voted in yet, but yeah, no, I can see it going a lot of places, and a lot of people who, I don't know, want a little bit more freedom with their guns are going to be very upset. I myself do not own one. As you know, I own the Shock Pen, right? I had to do that.
See, I do own firearms, but again, in Canada, we don't have the Second Amendment, and we absolutely have laws regarding their safe storage and transportation. And handguns in particular are classed as restricted firearms. I don't own any handguns. I don't see the need to go through all of the legal hoo-ha to get one. But Ian Runkle, who's also a Canadian lawyer and firearms expert, I'm not an expert in anything. Ian Runkle, who I defer to when it comes to firearms talk in Canada, He owns a couple of handguns. I believe he showed them on stream before. He's braver than I am. If I owned a handgun, I would never show it on camera.
Hmm.
I just have and again, it's just a personal thing. It's
Scott
my
Reich Scott Reich showed his, after the Koberger murders, or we don't know that Koberger allegedly, whatever, he showed his K-bar knives. He showed his whole collection of knives on
yeah.
stream, Scott Reich
Ay,
did.
yeah. Anyways, never said criminals were smart.
Oh
Never,
my
never
god.
said that.
Well, he's
Anyways,
an attorney in Colorado, so I don't know. I mean,
I do think we're coming up to the conclusion of the show
yeah,
here. I don't want to
exactly.
get you, don't want to keep you too long, but do you have any final thoughts or something you wanted to go into that we didn't perhaps cover?
I just don't, I really, it's going to be interesting about James Crumbley. Jury selection starts on March 5th, which is coming up very soon.
Yep.
And I just don't know. I think, and Jennifer's sentencing comes up on April the 9th. She can't appeal until after she's sentenced. Is that correct, Tim?
No,
Oh,
no.
she's probably already appealed the decision to find her guilty.
Yeah, I think
And
I think there's a 30-day window. Now, in order to launch you can serve notice that you intend to appeal. Again, that's a Michigan specific requirement. So not knowing what their Court of Appeals Act says, um, just going by what I know about appealing cases here in Canada, you have to serve the notice within 30 days, and then you'll get a due date for the filing
got it.
to
Okay.
file your brief.
I just don't know how those two are going to affect each other, those two cases. And it just is going to be fascinating to if we watch the same thing repeat with James Crumbley and then he appeals. And it's just going to be an interesting things to see where it actually ends up settling
Yeah,
in the coming days or years. Even if you think about it, they had been locked up since 2021 December, and they didn't go to trial until, or Jennifer didn't go to trial until 24. So who knows where this is going to end up? But that's the only thing I'm looking out at is how's James's trial going to differ from Jennifer's, if it's going to be the same, and where it's all going to end up and land.
yeah. Sorry, I just got a message there. I gotta. There we go.
Smooth
Okay.
maneuver.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just had
that's
to do
the
that
and
real
then the
quick.
parting comment, I guess, would say, I mean, as far as that, so you answered my question, that everything is political. Definitely put on that hat, I think, or that lens when viewing some stuff in the future and see if there is possibly a way my mind could make this about a political issue. And I think that would be a good little exercise because I think I'm stuck in my little mental health way of looking at things, and
Mhm.
I'm up for a challenge. So I appreciate you having me on your show again. I always enjoy being here and learning something new all the time, for sure.
Well, then of course you're very generous with your time, and you always have something to add to the show, and I'm happy to have you. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really appreciate it. Yes,
absolutely.
timing trial scheduling is also a political decision, but less so because calendars. Like all of the defense attorneys' calendars and the the state's prosecutors' calendar, the judge's schedule. Those factor in more than the political aspect, but don't certainly politics plays a little bit of a role in that. Look at the Trump trials, right? The timing is a big issue there. Now, anyone asking, do I would if the Court of Appeals agrees to hear Jennifer's case, would that affect James's trial? I'm going to go ahead and say no. Typically, criminal cases are isolated in a booth. And so the outcome of one trial is not necessarily bearing on another trial unless the court is going to rule on a matter of law that is applicable to the trial in progress, in which case that may require a stay of proceedings, or that may overturn a subsequent conviction. Again, I just because it's under appeal should not affect James's trial one bit.
Hmm. Well, we'll see. We will see what happened. I didn't know I was a mod on your channel. You made me a mod. That's
Yep.
super cool. Oh,
So
okay.
that you
So I
can
can post links and all that other stuff,
yep.
right?
Go ahead, show your stuff. How can people find you?
Oh my goodness. People can find me on this show or they can find me at my office. But yeah, I can post my YouTube channel here real quick if you want me to. And yeah, I didn't even realize I was a mod.
Go for it.
Awesome. All right. So, yeah, I've been doing February has been Love Month. And so I actually um, have been doing a lot of things that have been kind of funny. Uh, I'll go ahead and post my link in here real quick. And yeah, so I actually had a hot date on Valentine's Day that wasn't my husband. So if you want to find out about my hot date, check it out. And a couple of reaction videos to some old an old Love Connection video that I thought was pretty humorous. And yeah, so everything's kind of love themed through the month of February. I have one more to do. It's about an app that you can download if you're a shy person and you want to date somebody. So I do all kinds of weird things on my channel and try and calm the chaos as much as I can for sure. So there's the channel name. You can find me there, or you know, about section has my email address if you want to contact me. Thank you so much for having me on the show and let me plug myself. That was super cool.
All right. And thank you again, Tracy, for coming on, being generous with your time. To everyone else watching, Tracy, I'll just ask you to hang out for a second. So we just a quick debrief after, but
Sure.
I'll take that out. To everyone else watching tonight, I hope, and hey, everyone on the replay crew, shout out to you, replay crew. But this is the content I love going into. This is my forte, man. I love talking about politics. Wow. You want to talk about the month of love? This is my month of love for politics. So on the show that everything is political, no matter the topic, I can make it political. If you want to hear about my political takes on any topic, even the outrageous and the absurd, you know how to get in touch with me. Leave a comment in this video. My email has been scrolling across the bottom of the screen the entire show. You can get me there. Otherwise, I will see everyone on episode 4. Until next time, everyone, stay frosty.
Stay political.